The heat in Harlem in August of 1955 didn't just sit on you, it owned you. It was a physical weight, a heavy, suffocating blanket of humidity that rose up from the asphalt and pressed down from the gray, hazy sky. It made the air shimmer above the hood ornaments of the Cadillacs parked along Lenox Avenue. It made the old brownstones sweat, the bricks seemingly weeping with the moisture of a city that never truly cooled down. In the middle of the day, the streets usually moved with a sluggish, sticky rhythm. Men walked slower, wiping their necks with handkerchiefs. Women fanned themselves on stoops, the paper fans moving in a hypnotic, synchronized beat. The jazz clubs were closed, their neon signs buzzing faintly, waiting for the sun to dip below the horizon so the real life of the neighborhood could begin. But on this particular Tuesday, a Tuesday that would go down in the whispered history of the underworld as the day of the closed door, the heat felt different. It wasn't just the weather. There was a static charge in the air, a prickly, unseen tension that made the hair on the back of your neck stand up even as the sweat ran down your spine. The old-timers on the corners, the men who had survived the Depression and the wars and the police raids, they felt it first. They stopped their domino games. They looked up from their newspapers. They sniffed the air like old hunting dogs catching the scent of a storm that wasn't on the weather report. They knew the smell of trouble. It smelled like gasoline and cheap cologne and the metallic tang of gun oil. At the center of this invisible storm, moving through the heat with a coolness that defied the laws of thermodynamics, was Ellsworth Bumpy Johnson. To the newspapers downtown, he was a menace, a gangster, a blight on the city. To the people of Harlem, he was the professor, the godfather, the man who paid the rent when the landlord came knocking, and the man who ensured that the streets remained under local control. Bumpy didn't walk, he glided. He wore a suit of light gray linen tailored to perfection, not a wrinkle to be found despite the oppressive humidity. His tie was silk, a deep midnight blue, tied in a knot that was geometrically flawless. He wore a fedora brimmed just so, shading his eyes that saw everything and revealed nothing. Bumpy was a creature of habit. He believed in discipline. He believed that chaos was the enemy of profit and the friend of the police. Every Tuesday morning at exactly 11:30 a.m., Bumpy Johnson got a haircut and a shave. It was a ritual as sacred as church, perhaps more so, because in the barber's chair, a man was vulnerable. He was exposed. A razor was inches from his jugular. To sit in that chair, eyes closed, hot towel on your face, was the ultimate display of power. It said to the world, I am so untouchable, I am so secure in my kingdom, that I can sleep while a man holds a blade to my throat. His destination was Sip's sanitary barbershop on 135th Street. It was a Harlem institution, a place where the linoleum was checkered black and white, the air smelled of bay rum and talcum powder, and the conversation flowed faster than the tap water. Sip, the owner, was a man who had been cutting hair since the Harlem Renaissance. He knew every head in the neighborhood, and he knew enough secrets to bring down the city government if he ever decided to write a memoir. But Sip knew the rules. What was said in the chair stayed in the chair. However, as Bumpy walked down 135th Street that morning, his mind was not on his hairline or the gossip of the day. His mind was a chessboard, and he was currently calculating a move that had begun 3 days prior. The trouble, as it often did, came from downtown. A new faction of the Genovese family, led by a capo named Sal the Snake Valachi, had decided that Harlem was ripe for expansion. Valachi was a man of the new school. He didn't respect the old treaties. He didn't respect the boundaries drawn by Lucky Luciano and Bumpy years ago. Valachi saw Harlem not as a sovereign territory, but as a cash cow that was being milked by the wrong people. He looked at the numbers racket, the heroin trade, the protection money, and he saw millions of dollars that belonged in his pocket. He called Bumpy a relic. He called him an educated thug. He told his men that Bumpy Johnson was soft, that he had spent too much time reading books and not enough time breaking legs. Valachi made the classic mistake of the arrogant. He confused silence with weakness. He confused a lack of noise with a lack of teeth. For the last week, Valachi's men had been probing. A collection runner beaten up on 125th Street, a window smashed at a club Bumpy protected. Small things, tests. They were poking the lion to see if he would roar. Bumpy hadn't roared. He hadn't retaliated. He had simply watched, his silence growing heavier and more terrifying with each passing day. Valachi took this as a green light. He decided it was time for the final move. He didn't want a war. A war was expensive. A war brought heat. Valachi wanted a decapitation. He wanted to cut off the head of the snake and watch the body writhe until it died. And so the plan was hatched. A hit, not a drive-by, not a sniper from a rooftop. A statement. They would take Bumpy Johnson out in his own neighborhood, in his own sanctuary, while he was relaxed and defenseless. They would walk into Sip's Barbershop, 20 men strong, and they would riddle the king of Harlem with bullets while he sat with shaving cream on his face. It was to be a public execution, a message to every would-be tough guy in New York that the old guard was dead and the new management had arrived. Bumpy turned the corner toward the barbershop. He paused for a fraction of a second, lighting a cigarette. The flame flared, and he inhaled the smoke, letting his eyes sweep the street. It looked normal to the untrained eye. There were kids playing stickball with a broom handle and a rubber ball. There was a woman pushing a pram. There was a delivery truck double parked, the driver unloading crates of soda. But Bumpy saw the anomalies. He saw the sedan parked across the street with 2 men in the front seat who weren't talking to each other. He saw the delivery truck driver looking at his watch, not his manifest. He saw that the usual group of old men who sat on the bench outside the bodega were gone, their spot empty. The jungle telegraph was active. The neighborhood knew something was going down, even if they didn't know the specifics. The birds had stopped singing because the hawk was circling. Bumpy didn't turn around. He didn't signal for help. He adjusted his cufflinks, gold glinting in the harsh sun, and continued walking. A faint, almost imperceptible smile touched the corner of his lips. It wasn't a smile of joy. It was the smile of a grandmaster who watches his opponent move a knight into a trap that was set 10 moves ago. "Morning, Mr. Johnson," a young boy shouted, running past him with a newspaper. "Easy, son," Bumpy said, his voice a low rumble that cut through the street noise. "Keep your eyes open today. Might be a show." The boy didn't understand, but he slowed down, looking at the tall man in the gray suit with awe. Bumpy walked up to the door of Sip's Barbershop. The sign in the window said open, but the blinds were drawn halfway down against the sun. Bumpy pushed the door open. A little bell jingled overhead, a cheerful sound that felt out of place on such a heavy day. The shop was cool, darker than the street. The air conditioner rattled in the window, fighting a losing battle against the August heat, but it provided a welcome relief. Sip was there, standing by his chair, stropping a straight razor on a leather belt. Back and forth, shclack, shclack. The rhythm was fast, nervous. Sip's hands were shaking. There was no one else in the shop. Usually, on a Tuesday morning, there would be 3 or 4 men waiting, reading the sports pages, arguing about the Dodgers. Today, the waiting chairs were empty. The magazines were stacked neatly, untouched. "Mr. Johnson," Sip said, his voice tight. He didn't look Bumpy in the eye. He kept his eyes on the razor. You're on time." "I'm always on time, Sip," Bumpy said, closing the door behind him. He didn't lock it. Not yet. He walked over to the coat rack and took off his fedora, placing it carefully on a hook. He took off his linen jacket, folding it inside out to protect the fabric, and hung it up. He unbuttoned his cuffs and rolled his sleeves up to the elbow, revealing forearms that were thick with muscle, the only giveaway of the physical power that lay beneath the intellectual veneer. "You seem jumpy, Sip," Bumpy said, moving to the barber's chair. "Coffee strong this morning?" Sip swallowed hard, his Adam's apple bobbing in his thin throat. "Heat, Mr. Johnson, just the heat. Bad for the nerves." Bumpy hummed. He sat down in the heavy leather chair. It groaned under his weight. He settled in, crossing his ankles on the footrest. "Well, let's get to it. The usual. And a shave. Close. I have a meeting later, and I want to look sharp." Sip draped the cape over Bumpy, tying it tight around his neck. His fingers fumbled with the knot. A shave. Right. A shave. Bumpy leaned his head back against the headrest. He closed his eyes. "Relax, old friend," Bumpy whispered. "You do your part. I'll handle the rest." Sip paused. He looked down at the man in his chair, the most dangerous man in New York, lying there with his neck exposed. Sip knew what was waiting outside. He had seen the cars. He had received the phone call 10 minutes ago, a voice telling him that if he closed the shop or warned Bumpy, his shop would be burned to the ground with him inside. Sip was a barber, not a soldier. He was terrified. But Bumpy's words, calm and solid as a granite block, steadied him. "Yes, sir," Sip whispered. He went to the steamer and pulled out a hot towel. He wrapped it around Bumpy's face, covering everything but his nose. Outside, the trap was closing. 2 blocks away, in a diner that smelled of grease and stale coffee, Vinny, the butcher Moretti, checked his watch. Vinny was Valachi's top enforcer. He was a brute of a man, built like an icebox, with a neck that was wider than his head, and a temperament that was 90% aggression and 10% Chianti. He was wearing a suit that was too tight and too loud, a pinstripe monstrosity that screamed mobster to anyone with eyes. Vinny was sitting with 3 other men, all of them hard-eyed, all of them sweating. On the table between them sat 4 heavy .45 caliber automatics. "He's in," a runner said, bursting through the door of the diner. "Just walked in. Alone. No bodyguards, no Junie bird, just the old man." Vinny grinned. It was a wolfish, ugly expression. "I told you," he snarled at the table. "He's arrogant. He thinks he's untouchable. He thinks this is 1940. He don't know the game has changed." Vinny stood up, grabbing his gun and shoving it into his waistband. "All right, boys, let's make history. The boss wants him dead in the chair. He wants a picture of Bumpy Johnson with his face full of soap and his brains on the floor. Let's go." They moved out. 20 men in total. They came from the diner, from the parked sedans, from the back of the delivery truck. They didn't run. They walked with purpose, converging on the barbershop like a pack of wild dogs closing in on a wounded deer. They were loud about it. They didn't care who saw. They wanted witnesses. They wanted the neighborhood to see the power of the new regime. They checked their weapons in the open sunlight: shotguns, pistols, a Thompson submachine gun carried by a man named Sally No-Nose. The street cleared instantly. Mothers grabbed their children and ran into apartment buildings. Store owners slammed their grates down and locked them. The silence that Bumpy had sensed earlier now became absolute. It was the silence of a held breath, the silence of a city bracing for the impact of a bomb. Inside the shop, the only sound was the scraping of the razor. Sip had removed the towel and applied the warm lather. He was working on Bumpy's left cheek, the blade moving in short, rasping strokes. "Don't nick me, Sip," Bumpy said from under the foam. "I'd hate to bleed before the fighting starts." "No, sir," Sip squeaked. Bumpy listened. He didn't need to see through the window to know where they were. He could hear the heavy soles of their shoes on the pavement. He could hear the car doors slamming, not one or two, but 5, 6. He could hear the murmured commands. Left flank. Cover the alley. Front door. He counted them by their footsteps. At least 15, maybe 20. Valachi really wanted to make sure. It was almost flattering. Bumpy's heart rate didn't spike. It slowed down. This was the moment he lived for, the moment when the trap snapped shut. The only question was, who was inside the cage? Vinny the butcher reached the front of the shop. He signaled to his men. 2 went to the alley to block the back exit. 4 stood by the windows, shotguns raised. The rest, 12 heavy hitters, crowded behind Vinny at the front door. Vinny adjusted his tie. He wanted to look good for this. He wanted to be the man who killed the legend. He reached out with a heavy, hairy hand and tried the door handle. It turned, unlocked. "Too easy," Vinny whispered. He didn't open it gently. He lifted his leg and kicked the door open with a crash that shattered the little bell overhead. The door slammed against the interior wall, shaking the pictures of boxing champions that lined the shop, but the heavy steel frame held firm. Everybody inside. Vinny roared. He waved at the men by the windows. "Get in here. I want you to see this." The 4 men by the windows abandoned their posts and piled into the shop, eager for the show. Now 16 men plus Vinny packed into the cool dimness, weapons drawn. Everybody freeze. Vinny bellowed, his .45 raised and pointed directly at the barber's chair. The shop was filled with the smell of sweat and violence. They were a wall of muscle and weaponry. Sip screamed and dropped the razor. He threw his hands up, backing away until he hit the counter, knocking over jars of blue disinfectant. "Don't shoot, please God, don't shoot." In the chair, the figure didn't flinch. Bumpy Johnson lay reclined, the cape covering his body, his face masked in white shaving cream. He didn't jump. He didn't gasp. He didn't beg. Vinny laughed. It was a triumphant, barking sound. "Look at this," he sneered, gesturing with his gun. "The king of Harlem, caught napping. Hey, Bumpy. Wake up. You got company." Bumpy's eyes opened. They were clear, dark, and utterly unimpressed. He looked at the ceiling, then slowly lowered his gaze to Vinny. He didn't move his head. He just moved his eyes. "You're interrupting my shave," Bumpy said. His voice was muffled slightly by the cream, but the tone was unmistakable. It was the tone of a school principal catching a student running in the hall. "And you broke the doorbell. That comes out of your pocket." Vinny's face turned red. This wasn't the reaction he wanted. He wanted fear. He wanted pleading. "You think you're funny, old man?" Vinny shouted, stepping closer, the barrel of his gun inches from Bumpy's nose. "You think this is a joke? Look around you. I got 20 men here. You're done. Harlem is done. Valachi sends his regards." "Valachi?" Bumpy repeated the name as if it tasted bad. "Tell Sal that if he wanted to talk to me, he could have just called. He didn't need to send a circus troupe to interrupt my morning grooming. "Stand up," Vinny ordered. "Stand up so I can shoot you on your feet. I ain't killing a man lying down. I got some respect." "Respect," Bumpy mused. "That's a big word for a man wearing a suit that looks like it was stitched together from a sofa cover." The men behind Vinny rumbled. Some chuckled nervously. Vinny whipped his head around. "Shut up. Nobody laughs." He turned back to Bumpy, his finger tightening on the trigger. "Last chance, Bumpy. Stand up or die sitting." Bumpy sighed. It was a long, weary exhalation. Slowly, very slowly, he sat up. The leather of the chair creaked. He reached up with his hand. Vinny flinched, raising the gun higher. "Easy. Turbo," Bumpy said. "I'm just wiping my face." Bumpy grabbed the towel from the counter. He wiped the shaving cream from his cheeks, revealing the sharp, angular lines of his face. He wiped his chin. He folded the towel neatly and placed it on the armrest. Then he reached into his pocket. Every gun in the room clicked. Hammers were cocked, fingers tensed. Bumpy pulled out his money clip. It was gold, thick with bills. He peeled off a crisp new $50 bill. He held it out to Sip, who was trembling in the corner. "For the shave, Sip," Bumpy said calmly, "and for the mess." Sip stared at the money. He couldn't move. Bumpy leaned forward and tucked the bill into the pocket of Sip's smock. "Keep the change," Bumpy added. Then Bumpy Johnson stood up. He stood to his full height. He was taller than Vinny, and despite the fact that Vinny had a gun and Bumpy had a towel, Bumpy looked like the one in charge. He smoothed the front of his linen suit. He adjusted his collar. "Where you going?" Vinny demanded, confused. "I didn't say you could move." "I'm done here," Bumpy said. "And frankly, you boys smell like a locker room. I prefer fresh air." Bumpy took a step toward the door. Vinny stepped in his way, pressing the gun into Bumpy's chest. "You ain't walking out of here, Johnson. You're dying here." Bumpy looked down at the gun, then up at Vinny. He smiled. It was the ice-cold smile that had frozen the blood of men much tougher than Vinny Moretti. "Am I?" Bumpy asked softly. "You sure about that?" "I got the gun," Vinny said, though his voice wavered slightly. "I got the numbers." "You have a gun," Bumpy corrected, "and you have numbers, but you don't have the location. You see, Vinny, when you walk into a lion's den, you should always check if the lion is alone, or if he's just the bait." Vinny frowned. "What are you talking about?" "Excuse me," Bumpy said. He gently pushed the barrel of the gun aside with one finger. It was a move of such supreme disrespect that Vinny was too stunned to pull the trigger. Bumpy walked past him. He walked past the crowd of hitmen who were jammed into the shop. They parted for him like the Red Sea, confused, looking at Vinny for orders. "Boss?" one of the hitmen asked. "Should we blast him?" "Wait," Vinny said, looking around. Something was wrong. Bumpy wasn't running. He wasn't fighting. He was dismissing them. Bumpy walked to the front door, the one Vinny had kicked open. It was jammed slightly against the wall. Bumpy pulled it shut. He pushed it until it clicked into the frame. Then he reached up and turned the heavy deadbolt. Click. The sound echoed in the silent shop. Bumpy turned around. His back was to the glass door. He was now the only thing standing between the hitmen and the street. But he wasn't trying to escape. He had locked himself in with them. "You locked the door," Vinny said, lowering his gun slightly, a look of pure confusion on his face. "Why did you lock the door? You think that's going to save you? You just trapped yourself in here with us." Bumpy reached into his pocket again. He pulled out a cigarette case, selected a smoke, and lit it. He took a drag, blowing a perfect ring of smoke toward the ceiling fan. "No, Vinny," Bumpy said, his voice dropping to a terrifying growl. "I didn't lock me in with you, Bumpy's eyes shifted to the back of the shop, where a heavy velvet curtain separated the main room from the storage area. I locked you in with them. Vinny spun around. The other hitman turned, following Bumpy's gaze. The velvet curtain was pulled aside with a violent swish. Standing in the doorway was Illinois Gordon. He was wearing a trench coat and a wide-brimmed hat, a toothpick dancing in the corner of his mouth. In his hands, he held a pump-action trench gun, resting comfortably on his hip. Behind him, filling the narrow hallway and the back room, were a dozen of Bumpy's elite enforcers. These weren't street corner hustlers. These were the Swamp Angels, the hardest, meanest killers Harlem had to offer. They were holding Thompson's submachine guns, carbines, and heavy revolvers. They had been waiting in the dark, silent and still, for 20 minutes. Illinois Gordon smiled. It was a bright, cheerful smile that didn't reach his cold, dead eyes. "Afternoon, gentlemen," Illinois drawled. "Your two friends in the alley are already asleep. I hope you boys like a close shave, 'cause we 'bout to cut it real close." The atmosphere in the shop shifted instantly. The arrogance of the hitmen evaporated, replaced by the primal, sickening scent of fear. Vinny the Butcher looked at the wall of guns facing him. Then he looked back at the locked door behind Bumpy. He realized, with a sinking feeling in his gut, that he hadn't walked into a hit, he had walked into a tomb. "Now," Bumpy said, flicking some ash onto the floor, "before my associates get to work, I have one question." Bumpy took a step forward, the hitman flinching back. "Did you really think," Bumpy whispered, "that you could walk into my house, kick down my door, and not pay the price?" Vinny raised his gun again, his hand shaking violently now. We can shoot our way out, boys. Blast 'em." But nobody moved. The odds had shifted. In the tight confines of the barbershop, the first shot would turn the room into a blender. And Bumpy's men had the drop. "I wouldn't do that," Illinois Gordon said, racking the slide of the shotgun. "Chack. My trigger finger is itchy, and I haven't had my coffee yet." Bumpy leaned back against the locked door, crossing his arms. He looked at Vinny with pity. "You have two choices, Vinny," Bumpy said. "You can drop the hardware, get on your knees, and pray that I'm in a merciful mood, or you can start the party." But looking at your boys, Bumpy glanced at the hitmen, who were pale and sweating, their eyes darting around for an exit that didn't exist. "I don't think they want to die for Valachi today." Vinny looked at his men. He saw the hesitation. He saw the terror. He looked at Illinois Gordon, who was aiming the shotgun at Vinny's kneecaps. He looked at Bumpy, who was smoking his cigarette as if he were watching a boring play. "Drop 'em," Vinny whispered. "What?" Sally No-Nose asked. "I said drop 'em." Vinny screamed, throwing his .45 to the floor. "It's over. We're boxed in." One by one, the guns clattered to the checkered linoleum floor. The sound of heavy steel hitting the ground was the music of total surrender. Bumpy nodded. "Smart choice. But don't get comfortable." He pushed off the door and walked into the center of the room, right into the middle of the unarmed hitman. He stopped in front of Vinny. He was close enough to smell the cheap garlic sausage Vinny had eaten for breakfast. "You came here to kill a king," Bumpy said quietly. "But you forgot the first rule of regicide." "What's that?" Vinny asked, his voice trembling. "If you miss," Bumpy said, his face hardening into stone, "you don't get a second shot." Bumpy looked over Vinny's shoulder at Illinois. "Illinois," Bumpy said. "Yeah, Bump? Lock them in the back room. Take their shoes. Take their belts. And take their wallets. And then what?" Illinois asked. Bumpy smiled. "And then we wait. I'm going to make a phone call to Mr. Valachi. I want him to hear exactly what happens when he sends boys to do a man's job." Bumpy turned back to Sip, who was still cowering by the counter. "Sip," Bumpy said gently. "Yeah, Mr. Johnson? Sorry about the interruption. How about you finish that shave now? I think I missed a spot." Bumpy sat back down in the barber's chair. He reclined it. He closed his eyes. "And Illinois?" Bumpy called out without opening his eyes. "Yeah, boss? If any of them move, shave them with the buckshot." "Solid," Illinois said. As Sip applied the hot towel to Bumpy's face, masking him from the room once again, the hitmen were herded into the back, stripped of their dignity and their weapons. The trap had been sprung. The predator had become the prey. And in the middle of it all, Bumpy Johnson lay still, the coolest man in a city on fire, waiting for his shave to be finished. But the day wasn't over. Valachi was still out there. And 20 hostages in a barbershop was a powder keg that was about to explode. Bumpy knew that locking the door was the easy part. Keeping it locked when the rest of the Italian mob found out what happened, that was going to be the trick. Bumpy listened to the sounds of the men being tied up in the back. He took a deep breath of the bay rum. "Take your time, Sip," Bumpy whispered. "We've got all day." Sip's hands were shaking so violently that the straight razor looked like a silver blur in the dim light of the shop, a vibrating instrument of death hovering inches from the jugular of the most powerful man in Harlem. The air in the shop was thick, a soup of humidity, stale cigarette smoke, and the sharp copper tang of fresh terror. But Bumpy Johnson didn't flinch. He didn't even open his eyes. He lay back in the porcelain chair, his breathing deep and rhythmic, as if he were napping on a Sunday afternoon rather than sitting in the middle of a hostage situation that could spark a city-wide gang war. From behind the heavy velvet curtain that separated the shop from the storage room, the sounds of the re-education were winding down. For the last 10 minutes, it had been a cacophony of dull thuds, the sickening sound of pistol butts meeting ribs, the scuffling of expensive leather shoes on concrete, and the muffled, desperate pleas of men who had realized too late that they weren't the hunters, but the bait. Illinois Gordon and the Swamp Angels were efficient workers. They didn't scream. They didn't shout. They worked in a grim, professional silence that was far more terrifying than any verbal threat. "Chin up, Sip," Bumpy whispered, his voice a low rumble that seemed to vibrate through the chair. I can't, Mr. Johnson," Sip stammered, pulling the razor back. Sweat was dripping from his nose onto his white smock. "My hands, they won't listen to me. I'm going to cut you. I swear to God, I'm going to nick you." Bumpy opened one eye. It was dark, calm, and utterly devoid of fear. "Sip, look at me. You've been shaving me for 10 years. You know the contours of my face better than my own wife does. The men in the back, they are just noise. The man with the gun, he's just a temporary inconvenience. The only thing that is real right now is the blade and the skin. Focus on the work. The work saves us." It was a command, not a suggestion. Sip swallowed hard, his Adam's apple bobbing in his skinny throat. He took a deep, shuddering breath, wiped his forehead with his sleeve, and stepped back in. Scrape, wipe, scrape. The sound returned, a rhythmic percussion that cut through the silence. "That's it," Bumpy murmured, closing his eye again. "Smooth, deliberate. Don't let the world speed you up." The curtain to the back room swept open. Illinois Gordon stepped out. He had removed his trench coat and folded it neatly over a chair. He was rolling down the sleeves of his shirt, buttoning the cuffs with precise, calm movements. There was a smear of blood on his knuckles, bright red against his dark skin, but otherwise He looked like he had just finished filing taxes. "Status?" Bumpy asked, not moving his head as the razor worked under his jawline. "The inventory is complete," Illinois said, his voice flat. 20 souls, all present and accounted for. We collected 20 pistols, 4 sawed-offs, and a Thompson submachine gun that jammed before the first round was even chambered. Amateur hour, Bumpy. They didn't oil the slide. Disrespectful to the machinery. "And the men?" subdued Illinois said, cracking a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Vinny the butcher is currently crying. He's asking for a priest. I told him we were fresh out of clergy, but I could offer him a very attentive undertaker." "Bring him out," Bumpy said. "Just him. Leave the choir in the back." Illinois nodded to 2 of the Swamp Angels, massive men who looked like they were carved out of bedrock. They disappeared into the back and returned a moment later, dragging Vinny Moretti between them. Vinny looked like a man who had been put through a trash compactor. His pinstripe suit, which had been so loud and arrogant 20 minutes ago, was now torn at the shoulder. His tie was askew, hanging like a noose around his neck. His lip was split, swelling rapidly, and his eyes were wide, darting around the shop with the frantic energy of a trapped rat. They dropped him in the center of the floor, right in front of Bumpy's chair. Vinny landed on his knees, gasping for air. He looked up at the man in the barber chair, the man he had come to kill, and saw a king receiving his morning grooming. The psychological weight of the image hit Vinny harder than any punch. It was a display of dominance so absolute it made his stomach turn. "Sip," Bumpy said. "Towel." Sip applied the hot towel, wrapping Bumpy's face in steam. Bumpy sat up, the towel covering his features, leaving him a faceless voice of authority. "Vinny," Bumpy said. The voice was muffled but clear. "I'm disappointed. I really am. I expected better from the Genovese family. I expected professionalism. Instead, you kick down a man's door, you disrupt a local business, and you bring dirty weapons into my neighborhood. It's uncivilized. It wasn't my idea, Bumpy," Vinny blurted out, his voice cracking. "Sal. It was Sal Valachi. He ordered it. He said you were slipping. He said Harlem was ripe for the picking. I'm just a soldier, Bumpy. I just do what I'm told." Bumpy pulled the towel from his face. He looked fresh, rejuvenated, his skin glowing. He handed the towel to Sip and stood up. He loomed over Vinny, adjusting his cufflinks. "A soldier fights for a cause, Vinny," Bumpy said, looking down at the shivering hitman. "A mercenary fights for money. You aren't either. You're a errand boy who forgot to check the address." Bumpy walked past Vinny, stepping over the man's legs as if he were a piece of discarded furniture. He walked to the wall where the payphone hung. He fished a dime from his pocket, the silver coin glinting in the dim light. Who are you calling?" Vinny whispered. "Management," Bumpy said. He dialed the number. He didn't need to look it up. He knew the number to the back room of the Mulberry Street Social Club as well as he knew his own mother's birthday. He waited. 1 ring. 2 rings. "Yeah?" a gruff voice answered. "Put Sal on. Who's this? Tell him it's the landlord." There was a pause, a muffled conversation, and then the phone changed hands. "Johnson?" Sal Valachi's voice came over the line. It was loud, booming, trying to project strength, but Bumpy heard the underlying tremor. The jungle telegraph was faster than the telephone lines. Sal knew his team hadn't reported in. He knew something had gone wrong. "Good afternoon, Salvatore," Bumpy said, leaning his shoulder against the wall, relaxed. "I'm afraid I have a noise complaint." "What are you talking about, Bumpy?" Sal feigned ignorance. "I'm eating lunch." Make it quick. I have 20 rowdy children in my barbershop, Bumpy said calmly. They kicked in the door. They're making a mess. And the leader, a gentleman named Vinny, he seems to have lost his way. I was wondering if you wanted to come pick them up, or if I should put them out with the trash. If you touch a hair on their heads, Sal started, his voice rising. Stop, Bumpy said. He didn't shout, but the word hit the line like a gavel. Don't threaten me, Sal. Not today. You aren't in a position to threaten. You're in a position to beg. But I know you. You're a proud man. Begging hurts your knees. So let's call it a negotiation. I have an army. Sal screamed. You think 20 guys is all I got? I'll send 50. I'll send 100. I'll burn 135th Street to the ground. Bumpy sighed. He looked at Vinny, who was watching him with terrified awe. Bumpy covered the mouthpiece. He says he's going to burn the street down. Unimaginative, isn't he? Bumpy uncovered the mouthpiece. Sal, listen to me. You could do that. You could start a war. And in the chaos, maybe you get me. Maybe. But before the first shot is fired, I will send Vinny and his 19 friends back to you. But I won't send them in a car. I'll send them in envelopes. Piece by piece, finger by finger, ear by ear. The silence on the other end was heavy. It was the silence of a man doing the math. And then Bumpy continued, his voice dropping to a whisper that was colder than the grave. I will come downtown. I won't bring an army. I'll just bring Junie Bird. And we will walk into that club of yours, past your guards, and I will sit down at your table and eat your veal parmigiana while you watch. And then I will take everything. Not just your territory, your respect, your name. You will be the man who lost everything because he didn't know how to knock. Sal Valachi was a gangster, a killer, a man who had survived decades of mob warfare. But he knew when he was outmatched. He knew when he was looking into the eyes of something he didn't understand. Bumpy Johnson wasn't just a criminal. He was a grandmaster playing chess while everyone else was playing checkers. What do you want? Sal asked. The fight had drained out of his voice. I want an admission, Bumpy said. Say it. Harlem is mine. Harlem is yours, Sal grunted. Say it like you mean it. Say it so Vinny can hear you. Harlem is yours, Bumpy. It's yours. Stay uptown, I stay downtown. Done. Good, Bumpy said. Now, about the damages. Vinny broke a custom mahogany door frame, imported wood, very rare. I'll pay for the door, Sal snapped. I know you will. I'm taking the cash from Vinny's wallet, and the wallets of his friends. Consider it a stupidity tax. Just let them go, Bumpy, Sal said, sounding exhausted. Let them go, and this never happened. Oh, I'm going to let them go, Bumpy said, a cruel smile playing on his lips. But Sal, there's a price for the return of the merchandise, a handling fee. What fee? I'm sending them back lighter than they came. You see, it's a hot day, Sal, very humid, and your boys, they're overdressed. All that wool, all that silk, it's unhealthy. I'm going to help them cool down. What are you doing? Sal asked, suspicion creeping back into his voice. I'm teaching them a lesson about vanity, Bumpy said. Goodbye, Sal. Enjoy the veal. Bumpy hung up the phone. He turned to Vinny. Your boss is a very pragmatic man, Bumpy said. He values his territory more than your dignity. He agreed to the terms. What terms? Vinny asked, his voice trembling. Bumpy, please. What are you going to do? Me? Bumpy asked, walking over to the coat rack and taking down his linen jacket. I'm not going to do anything. I'm going to go home and have dinner. You, however, are going for a walk. Bumpy turned to Illinois. Strip them. All of them? Illinois asked, raising an eyebrow. Everything, Bumpy said. Suits, shirts, ties, shoes, socks. Leave them the underwear. We aren't savages. But everything else stays. I want a pile of Italian wool in the middle of the floor high enough to sleep on. No. Vinny screamed, scrambling backward on his knees. Bumpy, no, please. Kill me. Just put a bullet in my head. Don't do this. I can't go out there like that. I'm a made man. I have respect. Bumpy walked over to Vinny and grabbed him by the chin, forcing him to look up. Respect is earned, Vinny. Every single day. You don't buy it with a suit, and you don't take it with a gun. You tried to steal my respect today, so now I'm taking yours. Every ounce of it. He let go of Vinny and nodded to the angels. Get to work. The next 20 minutes were a blur of activity. The back room became a dressing room from hell. The swamp angels moved with methodical speed. They stripped the hitmen down. Expensive tailored jackets were tossed into a heap. Silk ties were cut off with knives. Handmade leather shoes clattered into the corner. The hitmen begged. They cried. One man, a heavy hitter named Luca, offered Bumpy $50,000 cash just to keep his pants. Bumpy didn't even acknowledge him. This wasn't about money. It was about the narrative. It was about creating a story so humiliating, so ridiculous, that no one from the Genovese family would ever dare to set foot above 110th Street again without feeling a phantom breeze on their legs. Bumpy stood by the window, peering through the slats of the blinds. The crowd outside had swelled. The word was out. The jungle telegraph of Harlem was more efficient than the New York Times. The people knew Bumpy had the hitman. They knew the door was locked. They were waiting for the curtain call. There were old men playing checkers who had paused their games. There were mothers with strollers. There were the young hustlers, the old deacons, the shopkeepers. Hundreds of people lining 135th Street, watching the door of Sip's Barbershop. "They're ready, boss," Illinois announced. Bumpy turned. The 20 hitmen were lined up in the center of the shop. It was a pathetic tableau. Stripped of their armor, they were just men, soft, pale, shivering men. Vinny stood at the front wearing polka-dot boxer shorts and a look of utter desolation. He looked small. He looked harmless. "Gentlemen," Bumpy said, addressing the group, "you entered this shop as wolves. You leave as sheep. The subway is 10 blocks that way. I suggest you walk quickly. The pavement is hot." Bumpy walked to the front door. He reached up and unlocked the deadbolt. Click. The sound was loud in the silence. He pushed the door open. The heat rushed in, carrying the sounds of the street. "After you," Bumpy said. Vinny hesitated. He looked at the open door. He looked at Bumpy. He looked at the guns held by the swamp angels. "They're gonna laugh," Vinny whispered. "Yes," Bumpy said, "they are. And you're going to let them. Because if you run, or if you fight, the laughter stops and the funeral starts. Make your choice." Vinny closed his eyes. He took a step, then another. He stepped out onto the sidewalk. The silence held for a heartbeat. The crowd stared. They saw Vinny the Butcher, the terror of Brooklyn, standing on 135th Street in his underwear. Then the second man stepped out. Then the third. And then the dam broke. It started with a single laugh, a high-pitched cackle from an old woman sitting on a stoop. Then a group of teenagers joined in. Then the men. Within seconds, the entire block was roaring. It wasn't angry shouting. It was worse. It was joyous, mocking, relentless laughter. "Look at him. Where's your suit, tough guy? Hey, nice legs. Did you forget your laundry?" The hitmen tried to maintain some formation, but the heat of the pavement broke them. They started to hop. They started to skip. They huddled together, a mass of pale skin trying to hide from the thousands of eyes that were dissecting them. They began to move down the street, a parade of fools. Vinny tried to cover his face with his hands, but there was no hiding. He could feel the eyes on him. He could feel the power draining out of him with every step. He knew, with a sickening certainty, that he could never be a terrifying gangster again. You can't be a monster once people have seen you in polka-dot boxers hopping on hot asphalt. Bumpy hadn't just defeated them, he had neutered them. Bumpy watched from the doorway. He stood in the shade, cool and composed, smoking a cigarette. He watched the procession of shame until they turned the corner toward Lenox Avenue, the laughter following them like a storm cloud. He flicked his cigarette butt onto the sidewalk and turned back inside. "Illinois," Bumpy said. "Yeah, boss? Burn the suits. All of them. In the alley. I don't want that bad luck staying in the shop. Consider it done." Bumpy walked over to the counter. Sip was sweeping up hair, his movements slow, his eyes still wide. "Sip," Bumpy said gently. "Mr. Johnson, you did well. You held the line." Bumpy reached into his pocket and pulled out his money clip. He peeled off $500, a staggering sum. He placed it on the counter. "For the door," Bumpy said, "for the trouble, and for a new razor. That one is tainted." "Thank you, Mr. Johnson," Sip whispered. "Thank you." "Junie," Bumpy said. Junie Byard stepped out from the shadows of the back room. He hadn't spoken a word the entire time. He hadn't needed to. He adjusted his jacket, his face a mask of stone. "Let's go," Bumpy said. "The show is over." They walked out of the shop. As Bumpy stepped onto the sidewalk, the laughter died down. The crowd turned to him. There was no mockery now. There was only silence. Respect. Awe. The people parted for him, creating a wide lane down the center of the sidewalk. Bumpy walked through the crowd. He didn't wave. He didn't smile. He just walked, his head high, his stride easy. He was the king, and he had just protected his castle without firing a single shot. "You think they'll come back?" Junie asked as they reached the car, his voice a low rumble. Bumpy paused, looking up at the Harlem sky. The sun was beginning to set, painting the clouds in shades of purple and gold. "Valachi?" Bumpy asked. "No, Valachi is a businessman. He knows he lost. He won't throw good money after bad. He'll find a scapegoat, probably Vinny, and he'll move on to easier targets. And the others? The others now know that Harlem has teeth," Bumpy said. "They learned that we don't just kill our enemies, we expose them." Bumpy got into the car. Junie slid into the driver's seat. They pulled away from the curb, the big Lincoln Continental gliding through the streets. Bumpy leaned his head back against the seat. He closed his eyes. The adrenaline was fading now, replaced by a heavy weariness. It took a lot of energy to be a god. "Take me home, Junie," Bumpy said softly. "Mamie is making pot roast." The drive was quiet. Bumpy watched the city roll by. He saw the kids playing in the fire hydrants. He saw the couples walking hand in hand. He saw the life of the neighborhood, vibrant and defiant. It was a hard place, a dangerous place, but it was his place, and he would hold it until his last breath. He arrived at his apartment building. He nodded to the doorman and took the elevator up. He unlocked his front door and stepped inside. The smell hit him instantly, rich, savory beef, onions, carrots, thyme. It was the smell of sanctuary. The silence of the apartment was different from the silence of the street. It was soft. It was safe. Mamie Johnson was in the dining room, setting the table. She looked up as he entered. She was beautiful, her hair perfectly coiffed, her dress elegant. She saw him, and her eyes scanned him instantly, looking for blood, for tears, for signs of the beast he had to be outside these walls. "You're late," she said, but her voice was warm. "Traffic," Bumpy lied smoothly. He He hung his hat on the rack. He took off his jacket. "Wash up," Mamie said. "The roast is ready." Bumpy went to the bathroom. He turned on the tap and splashed cold water on his face. He looked in the mirror. He looked at the face that had stared down 20 killers. He looked at the eyes that had ordered the humiliation of men. He took a deep breath and exhaled slowly. He watched the tension drain from his face. He watched the ice-cold mask dissolve, replaced by the face of a husband, a provider, a man who just wanted dinner. He dried his hands and walked back into the dining room. He sat at the head of the table. Mamie brought out the platter, the steam rising from the meat. She sat down across from him. "How was your day, Ellsworth?" she asked, unfolding her napkin. Bumpy looked at her. He thought about the razor on his throat. He thought about Vinny and his underwear. He thought about the laughter of the crowd. He smiled, a genuine, warm smile. "It was quiet, Mamie," Bumpy said, picking up his fork. "Just a regular Tuesday in Harlem. Pass the potatoes, please." Outside, the sun finally set, and the streetlights flickered on. The city kept moving, the stories kept growing, and the legend of the day Bumpy Johnson locked the door became another brick in the fortress of his legacy. But in the apartment, there was only the clink of silverware and the quiet comfort of a man who had won the war and made it home for supper.
Thanks for listening, folks. If you liked that video and want more, be sure to like the video and subscribe so you don't miss any Bumpy Johnson stories.